Bienvenidos, queridos amigos, a esta nueva edición del Mercurio Ahora Nunca. Estamos listos para arrancar. Bueno, hoy con la segunda parte de la entrevista que le hicimos a Parallel Mike. Bueno, como saben, en inglés, con subtítulos. Les ruego, bueno, se tomen el tiempito de leerlo los que no entienden el inglés. Creo que vale enormemente la pena. Hoy, en esta parte de la entrevista, habla, bueno, del tema de las monedas digitales, de cómo cree él que lo va a recibir la gente en el mundo. Y hablamos, bueno, de cómo el mundo está girando, de dinámica, ¿no? Cómo está cambiando su manera de comportarse. El tema de las materias primas, ya no tan baratas, ese ciclo de materias primas baratas que duró décadas, ya se agota. Y el tema de la dedolarización, el tema de la desglobalización. También hablamos del por qué el oro y la plata, por qué prepararse y por qué, ¿no? Y cómo hacerlo, sobre todo cómo. Para el Mike, que es un experto en esto, creo que nos va a ayudar mucho a entender. Así que bueno, ¿qué les parece si continuamos con la entrevista? Al final hacemos una reflexión que me parece importante. And in that order, what do you think? I mean, do you think CBDC is a done deal? We will see working already in 2023, and especially, and I want this especially this opinion of you. I mean, how do you think the vast majority of people will react to this latest measure of maximum control, the CBDCs?
Well, it's very difficult to foresee. Now, I did a newsletter all about CBDCs, and as far as I can tell, the earliest they're going to be able to get a CBDC up and running is something like 26, 27, but it's much more likely to be closer to 2030, in my opinion. Simply because what we're talking about here is an entirely new financial infrastructure. Remember, even the legal systems are not designed or worded to handle a CBDC. It's not the same as the old system. You know, we're not talking about just another form of currency. It is actually a control tool. And for them to implement this, they're going to have to rewrite everything. All of the rules are going to have to change because it's going to give us a direct relationship with the central bank, zero anonymity. You know, every transaction you make will be surveilled. And they've already told us that they're going to have things like transaction limits, so limits on how much you can have in your account, how much you can spend. And this is going to feed back into this techno-totalitarian future, because once you can control somebody's money, you can control their movements, you can control what they eat, you control how much they spend on certain items, or even if they can access money at all. We saw the Canadian truckers have their bank accounts blocked, and even people that donated to them. And what we're seeing already is people who are related to people that speak out. So even people that have nothing to do with maybe speaking out against CBDCs, their families have been targeted. You know, just today, Lauren Southern said that her mother has an Airbnb and she's been kicked off Airbnb because she's related to someone. So this is the future that they're looking for. It's total control, but it's not a done deal. And I think what they're trying to do right now, Antonio, is to kick the can down the road far enough to get that system up and running. But I don't think they're going to do it. I think we're going to have a financial collapse before we get to that point. And that means there's this period of chaos in the middle. And I think that's why central banks are buying gold hand over fist, because we're going to have a system where everyone has to default back to the asset of last resort, which is gold. And that's why we talk about gold too to our listeners, is that is something that's going to survive this system. And the central banks know it, and that's why they're buying record amounts. I think we're going to have this middle point. And in that place, maybe we don't make it to a CBDC. Maybe people actually rise up and say, we're not going to accept it. Maybe they reject the digital IDs. You know, this is, I don't ever see anything as a given, because like I already said to you, I think that we hold the power here. We just don't know it. What we've been given is a vision of a future, and we've been kind of bullied into thinking that that's the only option. And of course, if you give someone the right crisis, maybe they can force it. For example, if all of the currencies are hyperinflated, then they may say to people, listen, we've got the solution to make sure you never experience that again. Now you've got no pension and bank deposits. You kind of got no choice. If they say to you, we're going to give you a new system, it's a CBDC, what are you going to do? Reject that and starve to death? You know what I mean? So they can bully people into these new systems. We've got to try and educate them, or as many of them as we can before that happens, to make sure that there's enough of us at that point to continue sharing the message that if you put yourself in this new system, then, you know, what does that mean for your children and your children's children?
Yeah. Mike, gold, oil, raw materials, industrialization. Give me your perception of the proposal of Eurasia. I mean, Russia, India, China. Do you really see a chance of success in these processes?
Yeah, I think they're going to succeed in that. I absolutely do. I think they've been setting up for this. It goes back to at least 2009, which is when the central bank, the governor of the Chinese central bank, he came out and said that he would like to reform the IMF's SDR. He'd like to add commodities to that basket, include more currencies in the basket, and essentially take us away from this fiat Ponzi scheme, because he said it's created an unstable world. But if you go back much further, you could go back to 1959 when economist Robert Triffin spoke to Congress. And he said the use of national currencies in international reserves was a built-in destabilizer of the world monetary system. So it's not like this is anything new. We've known all along that if we use a national currency as the global reserve currency, it's going to lead to the situation that we've got today. So that's Triffin's dilemma. And China and Russia said, well, if you're not, they offered this to the US. They said, we want to reform it. We'll do it collaboratively, rather than go to war and have economic war and trade wars. We'll do it together. And the US said, absolutely not, because this is their power. This is the US's hidden power. It's their economic power. It's how they manage to move pieces around the chessboard globally. And of course, there's a lot of elites in the West who certainly don't want to be sharing their power with the East. For hundreds of years, we've had Western nations go to these developing nations and exploit them, take all of their commodities, all of their natural resources, leave very little behind for the native population, and enrich themselves. And that's just a fact. That's just the way it's been. It hasn't really benefited these countries to have Western corporations in them. Now, what China and Russia are proposing is that the new system is first and foremost going to be backed by commodities, and they're going to use a whole basket of commodities. Now, what's so important about that basket of commodities is it then enables all of the countries of the global south of Latin America that are completely enriched with underground wealth to use that to enrich themselves rather than other countries in the West. So that's enticed all these countries. And you're in a fantastic country over there. You've got lots of underground wealth in terms of silver. You've some of the biggest silver mines in the world down there. And you would be able to use that. Mexico could say, right, we're going to back our portion of the currency with silver. And China is also saying to these countries, you will be part of the basket. So it doesn't matter if you're not as big as America or as powerful. Everyone's going to get a look in. So this is a fairer system. It is more egalitarian. And it's going to fix many of the problems of the current system. Now, the longer that system exists, the more gold is going to become important to that system. And I always say this because you can back currencies by commodities, and that's what they're going to do. But remember, Antonio, it's only the global reserve currency they're planning to back it. We don't know what's going to happen with national currencies yet, although I would guess that they're going to get backed too by something of value. But the longer you have this system of commodities being used to back the global reserve, the more gold becomes important, because commodities need to be used. We use commodities to develop things. You can't store copper for 500 years. It starts to tarnish. You need to use it in electrification. The same with wheat. Agricultural commodities would go rancid. So you can't just keep using those commodities. So I think these countries will start to sell their commodities, but store the gold. So they'll sell it for gold and start to keep the gold. And China and Russia know this too. I think they've been very clever by starting out with a commodity basket. But if you take notice of what they've been doing, they've been storing gold for decades now. And estimates of China's gold reserves are 30,000, 40,000 tons. The same with Russia. They've been buying all their own domestic gold, knowing that once this system is up and running, that gold's going to become the number one asset. And eventually, I think we just go back to a gold-backed international reserve. Now, of course, what does that mean for the West? Well, they don't want to be part of that system because they have no commodities. Also, they're all beholden now to this global kleptocracy that is pushing forward with the green agenda. So they're not even allowed to take what commodities they do have. So what do they have left? Well, they do have substantial gold reserves. If you look at Germany, you look at France, Great Britain, well, maybe not Great Britain, they sold all theirs, but many of these countries of Europe still have gold reserves. So if we go to this new system, they're going to have to start putting up gold to buy these commodities. And again, that will absolutely decimate the West in terms of its global power base. Only the US will essentially still retain power in that new system, and they'll maybe have an empire with Europe or any country that's aligned with it. But outside of that, they won't have much global power, and the US won't be number one anymore. It will be countries like China. Russia won't be number one, but remember, Russia has about double the underground wealth as the US, so that will catapult them up the system. So this is why the US is starting to get a little bit worried and starting to think about wars and World War III, because it understands that if this new system does come into being, it will send America not just to second place, it might send them down 4 or 5 spots. And over time, America could start to look something like Soviet Russia. Europe, I think it's almost certain it will, places like Great Britain. So, you know, there is this geopolitical element too. Yes, we do have a banking elite and a global oligarchy, but they're enriching themselves with wars and pandemics anyways. They're fine. But in terms of the countries, there is also some political sovereignty there, particularly in the US and these big nations, and they're trying to push back against this new system. What's going to happen? Well, we don't know. It could all go up in flames in World War III. This is the really dangerous time of a global reserve currency ending and a new one arriving. And China has the power to actually, China does have the power to fight this battle. And that's why we've got this situation developing.
Yeah, actually, I was going to ask you about is the United States is already on its way to ruin as an empire, as has happened to all empires. I mean, what do you see about that? More signs about that?
Yeah, I think the US is certainly on its way to, it's going to the graveyard of empires. You know, that's where it's heading to at a very fast rate. And, you know, if we look at the signs and symptoms of it, you can see them everywhere. If you look at America in terms of its social status, you've got massive problems with drug use over there. You've got really a whole impoverished class now. You know, when you see videos coming out of the US of major cities like San Francisco, Los Angeles, there's just whole ghettos of people living on the street. It feels to me like the US really now is in those final moments of its global supremacy. We're certainly going to a multipolar world. However, it's the case of what does America look like after that? What does Europe look like after that? I think America is going to collapse into dictatorship, personally. I think America still remains. I think it clings on to some of its empire, so it will still have some control over some of the nations around it. Let's say Great Britain, for example, maybe Europe. Maybe Europe clings to America purely for strategic reasons, just to survive. Because remember, Europe is a very vulnerable space on the global chessboard. And without NATO, let's imagine the US goes into a hyperinflation and has to turn all of its attentions back home. Well, all of a sudden, you've got a Europe without a military. You know, the US certainly isn't going to be bothered about Europe at that point. So what does that future look like for Europeans? What does it look like for Americans? I think we fall back to something much more resembling a dictatorship. I think America will still remain. It's got a lot of underground wealth. It's got a lot of gold, potentially. If it's still got that gold in Fort Knox, we don't know. But I think the Europeans will be pushing for a gold revaluation eventually, because that's all they're going to have to play with at the end of all this. So there's lots of interesting themes that are at play. But I think Americans are going to be okay if they're financially set. You know, they're still going to survive if they've got some kind of degree of independency. But if you're in the city, if you're living paycheck to paycheck, then you're probably going to be wiped out very quickly in this coming future. And you will be forced into whatever totalitarian rules or diktats they put in place. It's going to be similar to the Soviet Empire, I think, towards the very end. Maybe you could say America might look a bit like post-Soviet Russia, albeit with more gadgets. But yeah, I think that's probably a good vision for the US. And, you know, there are people in America right now, Antonio, who lived during the collapse of the Soviet Empire. And they are saying we are seeing the exact same parallels. In fact, they've been saying it for the last decade or so. And where we are now, we've progressed so much over the last 10 years. So the people who have lived through this before, the same in Canada, the people who have lived through this before, where they've seen their countries collapse, they've seen totalitarians come to power, they're ringing the warning signs now, raising the flag, saying, listen, this is going to happen here too. So, you know, yeah. And I know my history too, and I'm seeing the same warning signs, not just in America, across Europe as well.
Yeah, we all the time have here the author Daniel Esterling. He's from Soviet Union, and he said, I'm looking the same signs. I mean, the same things I'm looking at right now. It's not that I want to talk about it because I want to talk about it. It's because I'm looking at. Look, remember, guys, you all the time have there see there the Twitter of Mike is that parallel Mike it's there. I beg you to follow him because it's really important, and also to follow his YouTube channel. It's going to be on the description of this video. YouTube channel and podcast, please. You need to go there, especially if you want to prepare yourself. If you're a prepper, or you like to be a prepper, or you want to know more about gold and silver and how to grow your own food, Mike is the man. Look, Mike, the last thing, why gold and why silver, and why we have to prepare and grow our own food? Just like a quick thing to summarize the whole theme for the people that are watching us, and they say, but what can I buy with gold and silver? I need dollars. No, man, the history is changing now. So Mike, can you explain them?
Yeah, so the first thing that I would point out is that throughout history, whenever we have had systems come to an end, financial systems, it has always ended with hyperinflations or a complete collapse of the currency. So if you're seeing those signs around you now, if you look back throughout history, read some books on this, read about what happened in France in the 1700s, there was 2 hyperinflations, Weimar Germany, you'll start to understand that is what's going to happen here. It's very clear if you know the history, but if you don't know it, it may seem, well, that's impossible. So I would advise people just to brush up on the history, and then you'll have a good idea of what's going to happen. Similarly, you'll also find that the way people protected themselves in every single instance was with gold and silver. That's how they protected their wealth, because you cannot print gold. You simply cannot print it, and it takes you outside of whatever system there is. And in the French hyperinflations, they tried to trap people in the system. They said you cannot use gold and silver anymore. You have to use the paper currency. Shopkeepers have to accept it. And you know what happened? Nobody would do it, because people understood that if they stayed in the system, they were going to go down with the ship. So it's really a case now of, do you want to go down with the ship? Do you and your family deserve to lose all of your hard-earned wealth? If the answer to that is no, then you need to have something to protect yourself with. Now, gold will see you from one system to the next. And even if the new system, they say, well, we've outlawed gold, doesn't matter. There's going to be people out there who value gold. All of the central banks are buying gold for a reason, because they know what's coming. They understand that the paper currencies are now on the line. They're probably going to go to zero. Historically, they always have them. And you need to think about that for yourself. So what I say to people is, you need to take yourself out that system, because there's red flashing lights all over it right now. Similarly, silver's fantastic, because silver can be used actually transactionally. Now, think about it for a second. If the whole system comes down, if supply chains break, nobody's going to be able to pay anyone. Digital payment systems will no longer work. Similarly, if we have the cyber pandemic that the WEF keep threatening us with, how are you going to pay for your groceries or your food? How are you going to pay for petrol or gas? You're not going to be able to. So you need to have something outside of the system that you can use, not just for the financial crisis, but also for all these other threats that they're telling us are going to happen. Now, if you've got silver, or if I had silver, for example, Antonio, I can go to my neighbor who sells raw milk, who sells cheese, who sells butter, who sells eggs, and I can use that to buy off them. They'll be very happy to take it. They've lived through hyperinflations over here, and they understand the value of real things. So they'd be very happy to take that. Now, if I took some hyperinflating currency, there's a good chance they'd say, I'm sorry, I'd rather keep my eggs, because they're worth more to me than this paper. So this is why I say to people, just look back throughout history, 4,000 years of history with gold, never gone to zero, always protected people 100% of the time in crises. Silver's very good as well. It can be used transactionally. And just look at what the central banks are doing. They are buying gold for a reason. All of the wealthiest families on planet Earth own gold for a reason. Now, similarly, beyond gold, you need to start thinking about your day-to-day needs. This is things like food, water, medicines. These are things that are also going to be potentially collapsing with the system, because like I said, supply chains, we have a cyber pandemic, they go down, we have a massive war, then all of a sudden all the supply chains could break. So you need to also think about this chaotic period. I think it's going to last probably around 10 years, where all those things could be on the line. Similarly, maybe you don't want to go to the new system where they're going to start to create these Frankenstein foods with bugs in them. You know, they keep talking about this kind of stuff. Bill Gates is heavily invested in it. They're trying to push all these things on the people. So it's maybe not just for crisis, maybe for your future. You want to start taking back control of things like your food production, like your energy as well. If the grid goes down, what do you need? You need off-grid energy so that you and your family can survive. Now, it doesn't have to be anything fancy. You don't have to spend tens of thousands of dollars. We got ourselves an off-grid energy system, 1 solar panel, 2 batteries. That's an emergency system, and it's enough to run the house in a blackout. We don't have to put all our lights on or run the fridge. We're talking about emergency stuff. So LED lights, for example, charging a laptop, using a radio, running the well pump. All of those things can be done off a very small system. So this is something that anybody can do. You don't have to be rich or have lots of land. It's about doing what you can, where you can. You can collect rainwater, for example, for your water system. All you need is a gutter. It can be put on a roof, even on a balcony. I can teach someone how to make a system. Similarly, growing your own food, you can do an awful lot with not a lot of space. You can grow potatoes at home in buckets. You can keep rabbits at home. You can breed them. There's all kinds of small scale solutions. Of course, the ideal scenario is if you get yourself out of the city a little bit as well, because those places are going to be quite chaotic. If you've got lots of people losing all the wealth, maybe you've got blackouts, it becomes more dangerous. Think about your personal security too. If you don't have a firearms license, maybe now's the time to get that done as quick as possible. Maybe it's time to take yourself to a smaller community that's a bit more hospitable. They look after each other. So all of these things are available to people. You just have to take that step, take those actions, and then I truly think you will survive. Of course, make sure you build that community too. You need other people around you that have got a similar outlook. But I certainly would say if you see coming what we see coming, you really need to act in as fast as possible. And if you do, I think you'll get through this, you'll survive it, and you'll come out the other side with your wealth intact. Now, I'm not suggesting people do this for financial gain. However, you've got to think also in this future where you've got lots of people that have no money, they're going to be selling assets very cheaply too. So you could actually improve your standing in life. And why shouldn't you? If you've prepared and done the right things, you can then transfer out of that goal, maybe improve your family's life, improve your future. So that's another element to do to it that I think about as well.
I was saying that I'm 100% agree with you. If we took a time to make an effort before it happened, we have to also think in our family in the future. So learn something value, and in the future
you will. One more thing as well, Antonio, is I truly believe also, this is my personal opinion, I could be wrong, but I believe they are going to revalue gold, because gold is going to be the centerpiece of the new system. All of the countries of the West only have gold to use. So if you're a country of the global South or Latin America, and you've got Western countries wanting to trade with you, and the fiat currencies no longer exist because or they maybe exist, but you're a part of a new system that only uses things of value, real commodities. What are you going to say to those Western countries? We're not going to take your dollars, your pounds, your euros. We don't need that anymore. We need gold. We want you to give us something of value. And those countries of the West are not going to want to deplete their gold reserves because they don't have a lot of it. They've got a lot in this current system, but in the next system, countries like China and Russia can just mine the gold. That's printing money for them. So these countries have a vested interest in revaluing the gold too. So that's another thing that I would say to people is gold has never looked so good as not just a protector of wealth, but also a potential increaser of wealth. And I think we've got conditioned to these paper assets, these Ponzi assets, the cryptocurrencies. I'm not saying they're all bad. What we need to start thinking about is this transition back to real assets and real things. And I think if you've got gold, there's a good chance you'll not only protect your wealth, but you'll be rewarded heavily too for that.
When you talk about revaluation of gold, do you have a number? Did you imagine a number?
Yeah, in my opinion, I think a conservative number would be around $25,000 in today's money. I have done a video as to why I think that is. And I think that's probably the starting point. So if you imagine what $25,000 would buy you today, I think a single ounce of gold will probably be in that region.
Yeah, of course, with a lot of inflation, but it will be also good. So we've been talking here, man, for 3 years to people: buy silver, buy gold, prepare yourself, learn to do something value so you can exchange your work for another thing. So hopefully we have a community that is listening. Thank you so much, Mike. It's been a pleasure. I hope we can do this again.
Oh, fantastic. I would love to. Thank you so much for having me on the show, and all my love to you and your audience. I hope all of us make it through this one. And congratulations on building such a fantastic channel. I was looking through the videos and it made me want to learn Spanish so that I could understand it all.
Thank you so much. Bueno, ahí estaba para el mic. Les ruego, suscríbanse a su canal. Está abajo en la descripción del video. Está su canal y también está su Twitter. Siempre lo vieron allí. Una persona sumamente amable y bueno, y aparte un conocedor de estos temas que están rodando desde hace muchísimo tiempo, pero que se hicieron visibles después que apareció el bicho. Fíjense, quiero hacer un par de comentarios. La semana pasada publicamos un video con Adrián Díaz Marró, o Marro, realmente es Adrián Díaz Marro, español que tiene ya décadas viviendo en China, su esposa es china, sus negocios, todo está en China, básicamente ese es su centro, ¿no? Y bueno, recibimos muchos mensajes positivos, de que bueno, mira, no sabía esto, otros mensajes también muchos de eso no puede ser verdad. Es decir, esto es un agente del Estado, es que como él trabaja ahí, entonces el gobierno le paga, es que hay muchos casos de empresarios que les pagan para que... O sea, yo lo que me pongo a pensar es, ¿por qué la fobia? ¿Por qué nace tanta fobia ante China? ¿No? Y es el trabajo, pues, de ingeniería social de años, décadas de Occidente diciéndonos, estos son distintos, estos no son iguales, estos son malos, esto no sé qué, ¿no? Yo no confío en el gobierno chino como en ningún gobierno. No estoy aquí para justificarlo. Mi trabajo es salir de dudas. Como me han mentido en todo, ¿por qué no me mentirían en lo de China? ¿Sabes, no? Pero como tampoco confío en el gobierno de China, entonces, bueno, busco a la gente para que me comente, ¿no? Estoy seguro que Adrián Díaz Marró tendrá su opinión, como otras personas tendrán otra, lógicamente. Lo que yo no entiendo es cómo alguien que no ha ido y que solo recibe pues noticias de un canal que él no monta, ¿no? Que ya sean redes sociales o televisión o lo que sea. Es decir, no fue China, pero él recibe de allí y eso está de alguna manera está controlado por alguien, ¿verdad? ¿Cómo tú estás tan seguro que no, o sea, que eso es así, porque los chinos son así y punto? A eso es lo que me refiero, ¿no? Por supuesto que tendrán miles de fallas, pero alguna cosa positiva deben tener. No pueden vivir 1.300 millones de personas encarceladas allí sin reaccionar. O sea, ¿cómo? Pues, o sea, no, eso es algo que yo no entiendo, no me cabe en la cabeza. ¿Cómo es que no pegan una revolución? ¿Sabes? Entonces, repito, yo quiero ir, he tenido que aplazar el viaje porque, bueno, no está abierto el proceso de visado. No lo han abierto todavía para visas de ningún tipo, por ahora. Entonces el viaje lo he dejado para Taiwán, Hong Kong, que está al lado. Hong Kong no tiene problemas de visado. Y voy a ir a Rusia en el mismo viaje, ¿ok? Así que cualquier persona que me quiera ayudar, si tiene algún familiar, amigo, conocido, que viva y sobre todo que hable la lengua local en Hong Kong, en Taiwán y en Rusia, en cualquiera de esos tres destinos, escríbanme a diario mercurio@gmail.com para yo ponerme de acuerdo con esa persona. A ver de qué forma me puede recomendar, ayudar, a dónde ir, porque en realidad yo lo que quiero es ir pues a las casas, a los mercados. Por lo menos en Rusia nos dicen que bueno, que el bloqueo los tiene locos y ahí ya la gente no tiene, y en cualquier momento tumban a Putin y no tiene la gente que comer y no hay gasolina. Bueno, vamos a ver, pues me voy a ir a una bomba de gasolina, no vamos a ir a esto, a lo otro, a una ciudad pequeña, una ciudad grande, a ver qué tan cierto es esto, ¿no? Entonces, eso es lo que queremos, de alguna manera, en mi trabajo es de construir los mitos, ¿no? Pero ¿por qué me dicen tanto esto? ¿Por qué creemos esto tan ciegamente? Si no hemos ido, si no sabemos, ¿sabes? Yo hubo una época en mi vida que viajé muchísimo. Eso me ayudó a abrir mucho los ojos. Casi 6 años viajando seguido con mi esposa, con la que hoy mi esposa, por el mundo entero. Y muchos haciendo trabajos también. Y eso ayuda mucho. Pero aún así, si no vives allí, también es muy complicado entenderlo del todo. Que eso es prácticamente imposible entenderlo del todo. Pero bueno, les quiero poner este video. Porque fíjense, este video, de esta manera funciona la censura. Censura, venga donde venga, de China, de tal. Los gobiernos compran los medios de comunicación y los medios de comunicación hacen lo que quieren, ¿no? Fíjense, esto es en Inglaterra, esto no es en Cuba ni en China, hablando de censura, ¿no? Porque uno cree que la censura solamente es allá, pues Cuba, China, Venezuela y no sé qué y tal. Resulta que Occidente, pues, nos tiene durmiendo en la Matrix y nosotros pensamos, ¿verdad?, que somos libres y que aquí si hay derechos, se respetan los derechos humanos y que nuestros países sí son los de libertad y no invadimos a nadie y no sé qué. Y resulta que es exactamente todo lo contrario. Veamos, este es un pedazo de entrevista. La gente dice, falló la Matrix, ¿no? Invitaron a un experto de geopolítica a un canal en Inglaterra y vean lo que pasa al final. Quédense hasta el final para que vean, porque es increíble, ¿no? Y esto es Occidente, esta es la tierra de la libertad. Veamos.
Join us. David, if I could start with you. Look, you know, Ukraine was a sovereign nation. It was attacked and invaded illegally by a dictator who rules the end of the Soviet Union. Surely those of us who believe in the rule of law and international stability should be doing everything we can to make sure that Ukraine prevails, shouldn't we?
I don't agree with what you said in your question there. There were some opinions you put in there. And the thing is, with this conflict, it's actually started in 2014. We had the Minsk agreements where there was an agreement between NATO powers and Russia and Ukraine to give Crimea autonomy and to give the Russian-speaking people in the Donbass autonomy as well. But those agreements are broken. And what you have is the Ukrainian regime, the Poroshenko and then the Zelensky regime afterwards, have been bombing and shelling ethnic Russians in the Donbass area for 8 years, with 14,000 people at least being killed. And so I think what's happened there is that Putin has basically gone in what he calls a special military operation in order to try to protect the lives of Russian people in the Donbass, because Western governments in NATO were actively arming the Ukrainian government, which actually is filled with real Nazi battalions like the Azov battalion and the Right Sector and so on. So it's not quite as how you laid out in your question. And the thing is, I think people in this country are completely fed up of it, because it's got really nothing to do with the lives of ordinary people in the UK, and are fed up of the government, the power in London.
Bueno, no dejo más la cuestión por la música, que puedo tener problemas de derecho de autor. Pero fíjense, el señor estaba dando su argumento y ellos paran la transmisión. O sea, no fue que por lo menos entraron para discutir o para repreguntar o mira, pero ya va, eso no es así, de repente. No, lo cortan. ¿Por qué lo cortan? Porque precisamente, para empezar, los periodistas no están preparados, ¿no? Para rebatir eso, porque bueno, eso no tiene forma de rebatirlo, ¿no? Por más que tú digas que Putin fue allá con un referéndum ilegal, entonces que él financia todo en esa zona, ¿no? De prorruso, bueno, de rusoparlantes, pues, en Ucrania, y Crimea y lo otro, ¿no? Pero no tiene forma de rebatir que el propio gobierno ucraniano estaba bombardeando, pues, esa zona de su propio pueblo. Entonces, ¿qué hacen? Nos vamos, lo sacamos al aire, pues, y listo. No tenemos por qué discutir con él ni nada, porque vamos a alargar el dolor, ¿no? Y mucha gente va a decir, pero esto no fue lo que me contaron, ¿sabes? Entonces, lo mismo pasaría, o pasa en todos los casos, en el caso de China, en el caso de tal, repito, hay medias verdades y medias mentiras. Por eso es las ganas de ir y constatar, ¿no? ¿Por qué? Porque igual, es un trabajo incluso personal. Yo sé que aquí hay muchos seguidores, pero siempre habrá miles de personas que van a entrar nuevas, van a decir, no, pero es que eso no es así, ¿no? Porque no vieron no viajaron, no vieron lo que hicimos, o sea, lo que fuese. Entonces, lo que les quiero decir, amigos, es, primero, ni yo ni usted, creo que ni usted, debería confiar en ningún gobierno, ni en el chino. Los gobiernos están hechos y ya nos damos cuenta, lamentablemente, para tener el control. Y si tú los dejas, van a escaparse. Pues bueno, hay que recordar el caso de los impuestos. Pues. En Estados Unidos los impuestos eran prácticamente cero. En lo que el gobierno empezó a arrollar al ciudadano, bueno, ya tenemos lo que es hoy, ¿no? Y eso en todo Occidente, ¿no? Que tú te ganas 100 y tienes que darle 50 para el Estado. Para que el Estado vea cómo los políticos se los gastan. Entonces, yo creo que lo primero es, no hay forma de confiar en los gobiernos. Yo no veo, virtualmente, pues, yo no veo nada positivo en el fondo, y sobre todo viniendo de un país suramericano, ¿no? Viniendo en este caso de Venezuela, y habiendo vivido en México, habiendo vivido en Ecuador, o sea, realmente no creo en los políticos. Y segundo, tampoco podemos creer que una cosa es exactamente como nos las pintaron si nosotros nos fuimos y vimos. A eso es lo que me refiero. O sea, lo que me refiero es que no es que China no sea un país que cometa excesos con su gente, que no, pero es tan así. No sé si me explico. O sea, fue así como me lo contaron exactamente. No ser otra cosa. Porque nos están diciendo que son esclavos, pero en realidad, cuando me pongo a ver bien, no son esclavos. Los tipos cobran por su trabajo, pueden decidir en qué trabajo se desempeñan, pueden viajar, pueden... O sea, eso es lo que trato de explicar, ¿no? Que bueno, que entonces llegó el bicho y los encerraron. Bueno, posiblemente. Pero cómo reacciona la gente, fue eso que yo recibí realmente o sea, es exactamente lo que yo creo. O esa información es verdadera, porque China debe tener enemigos, así como lo tiene Estados Unidos, como lo tiene Rusia, ¿no? Inteligencia, bueno, que juegan ese juego, ¿no? De la guerra sucia híbrida. Pues entonces, eso es lo que me refiero, amigo. No demos nada por sentado, porque nosotros no estamos allí, eso es lo que me refiero. No estamos allí. Y aún, si nos llama una persona para decir, nos está pasando esto, posiblemente la opinión de esa persona está pasando por el prisma de cómo él está entendiendo lo que está pasando allí. A eso es lo que me refiero. Entonces, les repito, si nos han mentido en todo, ¿por qué no nos mentirían también con el caso China o con cualquier otro? A eso es lo que me refiero. Como yo no confío en ellos, bueno, quiero ir a verlo. Pues. Mañana traigo a otro que no es Díaz Marró, que no es empresario, está ahí, pero es chino. Pero es que ese chino ya él tiene tiempo fuera de China. O sea, usted siempre va a buscar la excusa para ver cuál es la caída, porque te están diciendo lo que no quieres escuchar. Tú quieres, como la Matrix ya hizo su trabajo, tú no quieres tener esa contradicción. No, los chinos son comunistas y son no sé qué, y son malos y tal. Y Rocky ganó y Drago perdió y Rambo le ganó al otro y tal, porque ya te lo metieron, pues está impreso ahí, pues, en tu cerebro. Bueno, mi trabajo es decirte, ya va. Vamos a ver, vamos a preguntar, porque no creo que sea así tan simple, ¿no? Bueno, amigos, si les gustó este programa, compártelo, denle like y suscríbase al canal si no lo ha hecho. Recuerda que estamos en Telegram también, estamos en el mercurioahora.com y bueno, seguimos trayendo información, intentando que usted pueda tomar decisiones a tiempo, de todo tipo, ¿okay? Sobre todo para prepararnos. Para el cambio de calidad de vida, sobre todo, que estamos viviendo ya y que vamos a seguramente a ver incrementándose en los próximos años. Estamos conectados.